current political representation in Canada does not seem to be equal when you look at the numbers of seats in Parliament and in the Senate in relation to the populations of each province. So why is this, and can anything be done about it? It has long been a bone of contention in Alberta. So joining us from Calgary to discuss this is Dr. Mark Milke. He is the president of the Aristotle Foundation for Public Policy and one of the co-authors of the study called It's 2026, Not 1867, a 21st century review of population and representation in the House of Commons and the Senate. That is quite a mouthful there, Mark. Great to have you with us again.
It is. Thanks for having me on, Jeanette.
Of course. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Milky, you got it. Yeah, as a kid, Milky Way was the best way to get mocking in the schoolyard. But yeah, that's the best way to remember it is Milky Way.
All right, Mr. Milky Way. Okay, so Mark, it's a fascinating study, really. So can you give us a brief history lesson as to how individuals back in 1867 did not have equal voting rights, and how today, in some ways, we don't really have equal voting rights either?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot there in terms of 1867. Of course, politics is always about the art of the deal, and you patch, what were then, British colonies and, Upper Canada, Lower Canada, and then some newer provinces into the framework of Canada over time. What we ended up with, though, is some hangovers from 1867, but even the 1982 Constitution, where there's in some guaranteed floors. For example, some Atlantic provinces cannot have fewer MPs than they have senators. And the Senate is not representative necessarily of provinces or the regions even properly. So what we did in this study is say, look, let's look around the world to other parliamentary democracies, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand. What they do regularly is reapportion seats. They kind of remeasure seats and the population inside those seats, and then just parcel them out. And they try and make seats, for the most part, more equal in population. And in Canada, what we do is every 10 years, we add seats to the House of Commons, and we give some to the kind of higher growth provinces like Ontario, Alberta, BC, and the others pretty much get stuck with what they've got, although Quebec's gotten an extra few seats over the years. So the problem, though, is there's a vast difference between seats in terms of the population. So, for example, Prince Edward Island has 44,000 people as of 2020. Last year, the federal election. Alberta, Ontario, BC had over 130,000 people per seat. Saskatchewan, has about 77,000 people per seat. So there's vast differences across the country. And what we tried to do in the study is say, okay, look, if we wanted to actually make sure our votes were roughly equal across the country, what would it look like? And so we did some calculations. We have 343 seats now. We added 7 and said, how does it look with 350 seats? Well, all the provinces except Alberta, BC, and Ontario lose seats. Interestingly enough, for Westerners who, rightly complain about underrepresentation in Alberta and BC, Ontario is also underrepresented in the House of Commons, and they would actually benefit the most if we had seats that are closer to the population, each average per seat. So, but that's kind of where we started. Like, look, this can't go on forever because literally, no offense to PEIers or those in Saskatchewan, but even just to compare those two, Prince Edward Islanders, their vote is worth a lot more than someone in Saskatchewan, even though Saskatchewan's also overrepresented in the House of Commons by Alberta.
That is fascinating, actually. So how unequal are our provinces when it comes to representation by population in Parliament?
Well, in our scenario, we said, look, let's add 7 seats. Like I said, let's get to 350 seats. What that would mean is Quebec would lose seats, Atlantic Canada, each province would lose 2 seats each. Saskatchewan would lose 3, Manitoba would lose 1. And nobody likes to hear that, but Ontario would gain 12 in that scenario, BC would gain 5, and Alberta would gain 4. So basically, the western part of the West and Ontario would become more powerful. But then, look, the argument, and I think it's pretty straightforward, is this is kind of, basic democracy. You want votes to be more or less equal. Now, we made some exception for the territories. Some other countries make exceptions as well, like Australia for remote territories, but they also force the states in Australia, for example, to swallow the difference. You can average out the population providing, and then you can make an exception for very vast landscapes. But let me give you a clear example for the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, Wales lost 8 seats. Scotland lost some seats in the last redistribution in our mother parliament, so to speak, in the United Kingdom. So this isn't rocket science, and it's not radical. The parliament that we get our inspiration from, the House of Commons in London, they redistribute seats on a regular basis depending on population shifts. So like I just mentioned, England gets more, Scotland and Wales lose some seats. That seems to be eminently fair. We're kind of stuck in Canada, though, with just adding seats all the time, which always makes for a much bigger House of Commons as opposed to redistributing the existing seats that are there.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier the Senate, how the House can never have less seats than the Senate. So how unequal are the provinces within the Senate?
Well, that's, for example, Prince Edward Island. I think they've got 4 senators. They're not allowed to have, the deal is they can't have fewer MPs than they have senators, which they would if it was, closer to population averages across the country for PEI. So there's some of that built in. There's, the Supreme Court and the Senate has ruled it's all, they've made it very difficult to change the Senate. So we're kind of stuck in terms of if you want reform and confederation in terms of representation, especially where we get to vote for the House of Commons, then the argument is because the Senate is almost unreformable, then we really should think about reforming the House of Commons. It's the only place where we have votes in terms of our representatives. So I think the fact that the Senate is so difficult to reform, I think strengthens the case for getting closer to average population per riding in this country. It's simply not reflective of the 3, not Quebec, the 3 provinces besides Quebec that are the biggest in Confederation: Ontario, BC, and Alberta.
Yeah. Now, Mark, you did some polling across Canada about that, about reforming our system to reflect proportional representation for voters. So is it a big deal for Canadians, or is it more of a meh, like we don't really care?
No, they're actually very supportive of the notion that riding should be roughly equal. Interestingly enough, it was in the 60% range nationally, but you saw in places like British Columbia, 72% of British Columbians, maybe because they're quite aware that they're underrepresented. 72% said, look, yes, we think riding should be roughly equal in population size. Even Saskatchewan, which again, as I mentioned, under this scenario would lose 3 seats, 60-some% of Saskatchewanians, I can't remember which the term is, people who live in Saskatchewan, agreed strongly or very strongly that population riding should have roughly equal populations. Quebecers did as well, and so a majority in every province agreed that riding should have really populations that are closer to the average than the disparities we have now.
Yeah, I think maybe it's Saskatchewans. Now you got me thinking about that. Mark, we do often hear other parts of Canada voicing resentment towards Quebec and that they see the province unfairly receiving favored treatment because they're, the squeaky wheel. So did the numbers back that up?
Well, yeah, so what an example does, I think, just over 10 years ago when it was the Conservative government in power, Quebec complained in a redistribution analysis that they were slightly underrepresented, and I think they got a few seats. They did get a few seats in that redistribution, and we added seats to the House of Commons. Now the problem is that was very temporary in terms of the numbers. Quebec has always been pretty much overrepresented in the House of Commons when you compare them to the national average and you compare them to Ontario, BC, and Alberta. And so basically the federal government gave in to the squeaky wheel at that point, and they should have held fast and said, no, the fastest growing provinces are Ontario, BC, and Alberta. They should get more seats, and Quebec should stick with what it has. But there was politics going on then, so it's unfortunate. And look, I think people have to realize the bigger picture here as well. If provinces like Quebec or Saskatchewan or any province doesn't want to lose seats, then the best way to do that is to make your province so attractive by, much lower taxes than we have across the Canadian provinces. Imitate the Alberta example, even though our taxes are higher than they used to be, but imitate Alberta in terms of trying to lure people with lower taxes, make sure your investments, your jurisdiction is very appealing to investment. That creates jobs, and what happens when that happens? You attract a lot of people. which is why Alberta has attracted a lot of people in the past year alone. And that's why we keep seeing our numbers go up, including in the House of Commons. So that's really the long-term strategy for any province or people in a province who say, oh, we don't want to lose seats. The other way to look at this is, look, we shouldn't look at this provincially. We really should look at this nationally. We should have seats across the country, irrespective of province, that are roughly equal, except for maybe against some very far-flung territories, given the vast size of those. And that's a better way to look at it, as opposed to my province has X seats. How about, look, we should be roughly equal, whether you live in downtown Vancouver or in a rural part of Alberta or Ontario. Your seat should have population equivalent to maybe an urban riding.
Right. Mark, your study points out that our parliamentary system is based on the model used by the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, but these countries have actually made changes necessary to fairly represent the population. So what's stopping Canada from doing the same?
Well, politics. What federal politician is going to tell, an Atlantic province or Saskatchewan or Quebec that they would lose seats in redistribution? And part of the problem is independence, and part of the problem is the Constitution, again, the floor for some provinces, not every province, but the floor for seats. So part of it is constitutional, part of it is political, part of it is, just that hangover from 1867 and 1982. But the reason we did the study, we're not unaware of those dynamics, but what the other authors, including the former BC Premier Gordon Campbell and I, and our economist Ben, pointed out in the study is, we may find out, because of the separatist tensions out west in Alberta, but also Quebec, if that ramps up, that there may be a cracking open of the Constitution again, whether we like it or not. And if that happens, we should at least start with the facts on the ground. And the numbers on the ground are that 3 provinces, Ontario, BC, and Alberta, are underrepresented in the Commons. And the UK, Australia, New Zealand, their lower houses are much more rigorous about ensuring ridings are closer to each other in terms of population size. So, for example, Australia, I think it's about 5%. You have to have each riding within 5% of another.
Wow. And those unfair numbers are part of what's driving that separation sentiment in the West, isn't it?
I think so. I mean, there's a lot else, as you know, right? I mean, the anti-energy policies that emanated from Ontario or Ottawa after 2015. The regulatory burdens on the energy sector, the equalization program, which is again in the Constitution, but it's not completely unchangeable, and even how the equalization formula is calculated. So there are a lot of actual legitimate grievances out in Western Canada, including here in Alberta. And I say this as an original British Columbian. We had our beefs when I was growing up in BC. But yeah, that's part of the problem, is the underrepresentation. But also Albertans and the rest of us out west also have to accept that if we want actually a House of Commons that is more representative by riding, like I said, equal populations, then we also have to suck it up and understand that Ontario is underrepresented as well.
Yeah.
And so it's not just a Western thing. And I think we have to be frank about that. We can't have it both ways. And people shouldn't have it both ways. If you actually believe that votes should be roughly equal, then you have to give them to where the population is. But for now, that's Ontario, BC, and Alberta.
Right. Interesting. Unfortunately, we're out of time today, Mark, but thanks so much for coming on and giving us your time.
Anytime. Thank you, Jeanette.
That was awesome. Dr. Mark Milke is the president of the Aristotle Foundation for Public Policy.